Enchanter here, and this week's video is about the Alabaster Dawn demo currently under development by Radical Fish of Worldbuilding fame. This is a post-apocalyptic fantasy action RPG where you play as Juno, an outcast of the Chosen, emerging from her underground shelter into a desolate wasteland to fight the invading Nits and restore her once beautiful world. The backstory starts with a fantasy twist on the Fallout formula. The Nits aim from space, but humanity had known about it for years, so they built a set of underground shelters full of magical stasis pods to protect themselves until an appointed time when the 12 Chosen, blessed by the gods, were supposed to sally out and defeat them. Everything was going according to plan, except as they neared their goal, their divine weapons suddenly vanished, taking their powers away with them and turning a hard-earned victory into utter defeat. Then, an unknown amount of time later, Juno wakes from stasis alone, and as she tries to understand her surroundings, she finds her own disordered weapon lying nearby. By picking it up, she meets Abash, the adorable capybara spirit who inhabits it and acts as a guide and link to the gods themselves. Except the gods are nowhere to be seen. The demo features Juno's first fight against a Nit's nest, through which she liberates her home village, then jumps around several vertical slices, showcasing a few different environments and gameplay features, like dungeon exploration, puzzles, which Worldbuilding famously had a ton of, and some different weapons and elements. These segments contain some story beats, but they're gameplay focused and don't really offer a lot of context to explain what's happening. Still, they do hint at the deeper aspects of the game's world building and the many questions that surround it. Why did the gods suddenly vanish? How did the shelter survive even as the gods' powers waned? Just what happened between Juno and the other Chosen? What exactly is the Nits and why did they attack in the first place? The world building is precisely what's making me the most interested in Alabaster Dawn. The game borrows a lot from Greek myth and others in a way that feels very intentional. Lots of games use mythological references to sound cool without actually doing anything of substance with them, but the way all the little details in this game, starting with the title itself, seem to connect, makes me hopeful they're leading up to some interesting ideas in the future. Nits, the Greek personification of night and mother to many destructive forces, attack in this idyllic little world. Juno, which happens to be the Roman name of Hera, sister and wife of Zeus, being one of the 12 Chosen, which happens to also be the traditional number of gods and goddesses in the Olympian pantheon. Her parents Cassandra and Solon, which in Greek tradition happen to be the names of a priestess gifted with foresight, and the political leader credited for reforming Athenian society into a democracy, the fact that Juno is soon joined by a friend who just happens to be named Philia, hell, even the priest Noah being responsible for guiding their village safely through a world-ending calamity, seem to be a reference and hint as to his purpose within the story, though obviously not re-inspired. Now, of course, this is all just speculation on my part, and the final game might prove me completely wrong, but the mere fact that those references are there and interconnected in a way that evokes those ancient, legendary characters and their roles in real-life mythology already show a level of care and planning that you don't always see in action RPGs. I was also impressed by the dialogue. The writers did a great job in restraining themselves and knowing when to be subtle, merely hinting at things or leaving them unsaid altogether. In an industry filled with sarcastic, jaded, cynical protagonists who have this chronic inability to ever take anything seriously, Juno's grief and regret, the way she tries to hide it and even forget about it while in the company of her friends, only to suddenly have it all flood back into her mind when someone brings up a related topic, feel genuine and novel. But that doesn't mean the game has no room for humor. The post-apocalypse may be dark, desolate and dangerous, and so is Juno's heart, but the demo is still punctuated by some light-hearted silliness, even if only as a temporary reprieve. The animators did a great job with the character portraits, making them very expressive. There's no voice acting, but their body language speaks volumes, in a way that reminds me of Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance RPGs, except much smoother and more detailed. In fact, that's probably the best way to describe Alabaster Dawn's look and feel. It's just like 16-bit RPGs, but with the benefit of 30 years of constant technological advances. I loved the character design in general. Their outfits and hairstyles, especially Juno's, look great and distinctive, making every individual unique, yet fitting together as part of the same culture. The developers also seem to be paying special attention toward ensuring members of the same family actually look related, which might seem like a minor detail, but it's this kind of effort and dedication that bridges the gap between a good and an outstanding game, and I love to see it. Gameplay is fast, fluid and responsive. There's all sorts of combos, charged attacks, dodges and parries to use, and hits feel powerful, causing enemies to flinch, be shot back and stunned, making for a fun experience. You get a bunch of different weapons, both melee and ranged, and different enemies have their own unique attack patterns, resistances and weaknesses, requiring you to know when to switch up your approach while fighting them. The demo includes a sword and a hammer for melee, and a crossbow and chakram for ranged combat, and they all handle differently, while also having unique uses outside of battle. The dungeon exploration segment has Juno's friend Philia joining her, helping out with abilities of her own. She was absolutely useless in battle, to be honest, but her presence still made that section feel livelier and allowed the developers to come up with more complex puzzles that would be impossible to beat with just Juno's abilities. Because yes, there's a lot of those. Platforming puzzles, switch puzzles, block pushing puzzles, ball tossing puzzles, and I'm sure they're going to come up with a lot more by the time the full game releases, and honestly, that's great. The puzzle mechanics control very well, which can often be a pain point in these kinds of games, and make for a very welcome break from all the fighting. In fact, figuring them out can be just as satisfying as fighting a tough encounter. Lastly, Alabaster Dawn borrows the idea of campfires and limited healing from Souls-likes, but adds a cooking system on top of it. You collect ingredients and learn different recipes which, when eaten, define the amount and quality of healing charges you get until your next meal. You also get access to buff charges which you can use at any time to temporarily increase your stats. Unfortunately, you don't get much of a chance to engage with the cooking system in the demo, so I was unable to take a deeper look at it, but it felt like a potentially cool twist on the whole Estus Flask idea. I do have some criticism regarding character progression though. Leveling up works the same as everywhere else. Defeat monsters, get experience, level up, and when you level up, you get a small stat increase and 1 point to spend on your skill tree. No surprise there, except the skill tree feels very uninspired. You don't seem to ever get anything meaningful, just more stat increases. Your weapons have their own levels as well, and in this case, you actually get to unlock different combos and special attacks, but overall, it felt like a system that only exists because the developers felt obligated to fulfill the expectation that RPGs should have skill trees. Of course, that's just my impression from seeing the demo, and maybe there's some more interesting upgrades in the late game, but as it stands, I'd rather have the skill trees removed entirely, the major upgrades like combos included as part of the story progression, and the minor upgrades added to the automatic, predetermined level up bonuses that we already get. There's also a gemstone system where you find gems by completing puzzles in the overworld, which can then be attached to your weapons and armor. The bonuses I saw were also a little on the unimaginative side, you know, stuff like extra health, extra damage, extra critical chance and so on, but at least the process of collecting them was fun in itself, so I don't mind it. On that topic, I don't know if that's already a thing since it would only happen later in the game, but I really hope there's some way of knowing when I've already found all of the gems in a given area. Now for the technical section of the video. I'm happy to report that, despite being a demo for a game that's still in development, the settings menu goes above and beyond what I expected from an isometric action RPG, allowing us to toggle individual HUD elements on and off, choose different gamepad symbols between PlayStation, Xbox and Switch, fully rebindable controls and more. Unfortunately, it lacks ultrawide support and an FPS limiter, but other than that, it easily ranks as one of the best settings menu that I've ever seen in an indie game. As a side note, you should be aware the resolution options were a bit different than what you might be used to. It only goes up to 1080p native rendering, which is then scaled to fill the screen. Maxing out the resolution works fine for 1080p or 4K monitors, but it can look blurry in a 1440p screen. In this case, setting the render resolution to 720p and turning Integr's alien on should result in a sharper and overall better looking image. Lastly, the game has a warning about how the Steam overlay might interfere with in-game performance, but it seemed to work fine for me. Your mileage may vary of course, but I recommend at least giving it a try instead of turning off the overlay just because the game told you to. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with the Alabaster Dawn demo. It looks good, plays well, and shows a lot of potential in its writing. I have a few gripes with it, mainly regarding the character progression systems and the lack of ultrawide support, but these are minor in the grand scheme of things. More importantly, I didn't run into any bugs or crashes, which is fairly impressive for a demo of a game that's still in development. In fact, the game is so far from ready, the developers have announced their intention to release on Steam Early Access, just like they did with Worldbuilding all these years ago. I'm gonna be honest, I don't like the idea of playing story-focused single-player games in early access, so I'd rather wait for a full release, but this demo has me interested enough in their work to play Worldbuilding in the meantime, and hopefully they'll have finished developing Alabaster Dawn by the time I'm done and ready for another action RPG. Anyway, that's enough from me. That was a look at the Alabaster Dawn demo by Radical Fish. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, feedback is appreciated. See you next video, bye bye!